This is a story about how the aviation industry of the Soviet Union unraveled with its breakup. This collapse in the 1990s was part of the broader economic and industrial unraveling of the Soviet Union. Several unrelated factors led to the dramatic decline of both civil and military aviation industries. In this video, I will set out the reasons why the industry collapsed. The first reason was the collapse of the centralized state funding system. Soviet aviation was heavily dependent on central planning and state subsidies. The abrupt end of the Soviet Union's command economy eliminated the guaranteed orders for aircraft from Aeroflot, for example in respect of civil aviation, and the military. Aircraft factories and design bureaus such as the Tupolev, Ilyushin, Yakovlev and suppliers lost their primary customer, and the source of funding disappeared almost overnight. A second reason was the fragmentation of the aerospace supply chain. The Soviet Union's aviation industry was spread across multiple republics. Antonov was based in Ukraine. Tupolev, Ilyushin and Sukhoi were in Russia. Engine manufacturers and component suppliers were scattered across Belarus, Ukraine and Central Asia. After the USSR's breakup, these became separate countries, many of which had no reason or capability to maintain joint production. The third reason was the economic crisis and hyperinflation. The Russian Federation and other former Soviet states entered a deep economic depression. Military budgets were slashed and commercial aviation shrank as people could no longer afford to fly. Inflation and the ruble's collapse made aircraft manufacturing and imports prohibitively expensive. Another key factor was obsolete design and loss of competitiveness. But before I touch on these, if you have not already done so, please do consider subscribing to help the channel grow. Even better, click the notifications bell, as this will enable you to be notified of any future videos. The fourth reason was obsolete designs and loss of competitiveness. Soviet civilian aircraft like the Tupolev 154 or the Ilyushin 186 and the Yak-42 were technologically behind Western airlines. They had noisy engines, poor fuel efficiency, limited onboard comfort and avionics. In the 1990s, newly privatized airlines in Russia and the former USSR began to import Boeing and Airbus jets instead of buying newer Russian models. Brain drain and loss of talent was a fifth reason. With factory closures and job insecurity, many skilled aerospace engineers left the industry or emigrated. Research and development stagnated and many design bureaus went dormant or were absorbed into other companies. A sixth reason was global isolation and lack of foreign investment. Western sanctions in some cases and general financial risk made foreign capital and technology transfers scarce. Joint ventures were limited and often unsuccessful. For example, Yakovlev's attempt with the Yak-242 project. In the midst of all this doom and gloom, there were some exceptions which survived. Military aviation survived in part thanks to export sales of aircraft like the Su-27 and the MiG-29. Helicopter production, for example, the Mil and Kamov, continued at a reduced pace. Design bureaus were kept alive with limited funding and eventually merged under state-controlled conglomerates like United Aircraft Corporation in the 2000s. In short, the Soviet aviation industry's collapse was not just economic, it was systemic. It lost its political, logistical, and financial foundation all at once and lacked the tools to adapt quickly to a competitive global market economy. Imagine practicing communism or socialism one day and having to switch to capitalism, and in truth, it may well be that the people in charge simply did not have the skill to be able to work in a capitalist competitive environment or needed many years in order to be able to acquire such skills.